Did you know that Borzois almost went extinct? Not because of biology, but because of revolution. They're tall, narrow dogs with long faces and flowing coats. A body shape that feels exaggerated, almost surreal. Today, most people recognize Borzois from the internet. Quiet, awkward, and oddly elegant, and often played for laughs. But that shape wasn't designed for humor. Borzois were bred as sighthounds, hunters that rely on vision and speed rather than scent. Their long limbs, deep chests, and narrow heads were built for explosive acceleration across open terrain. Outdoors, they could outrun a wolf, and indoors, they're calm, reserved, and almost cat-like. That combination only makes sense in a very specific world. For centuries, Borzois were not just dogs, they were tools of a ruling class, bred for vast estates, ceremonial hunts, and a social order built on land ownership and inherited power. And when that world collapsed, the dogs bound to it almost disappeared as well. Borzois were developed in Russia to hunt wolves. That kind of hunting required land, horses, and staff, and dozens of dogs working together. Only the aristocracy could afford it. Owning Borzois meant you belonged to the ruling class, landowners whose wealth came from inherited privilege and peasant labor. Grand hunts were elaborate rituals, riders on horseback, wolves driven into open fields, and packs of dogs released in careful coordination. Borzois weren't bred for aggression. They're calm, disciplined, and precise, built to outrun and restrain a wolf, not to fight blindly. Their elegance mirrored the society that created them, controlled, hierarchical, and deeply unequal. And that world was already cracking. In 1917, the Russian Revolution tore through the country. The Bolsheviks overthrew the Tsar and set out to dismantle the aristocracy with extraordinary violence. Landowners were executed, families disappeared, and estates were seized or burned. The violence was driven by more than ideology. It was fueled by decades of resentment. For generations, Russia was marked by extreme inequality. A small aristocratic elite lived insulated lives of privilege, while most of the population faced poverty, insecurity, and limited opportunity. In cities, industrial workers endured long hours, low wages, and dangerous conditions. In rural areas, families struggled under systems that offered little upwards mobility or protection. When unrest emerged, the state responded with repression rather than reform. World War I pushed these tensions to the breaking point. Food shortages spread, soldiers deserted, and faith in the monarchy collapsed. By 1917, the old social order was widely seen not just as unjust, but intolerable. When the revolution came, anger was directed not only at people, but at symbols. Anything that represented inherited privilege and aristocratic power. Anything associated with the old ruling class became a target. That included their dogs. Borzois were not seen as animals. They were seen as living symbols of oppression, reminders of a system built on inherited privilege and social hierarchy. In the chaos that followed, many were deliberately killed. One of the most famous examples was Perchino, the largest and most prestigious Borzoi estate in Russia, owned by Grand Duke Nicholas. At its height, the kennel held more than 100 Borzois, the result of generations of careful breeding. After the revolution, estates like Perchino were seized by Bolshevik forces. The dogs were not spared. Many Borzois were killed by communists who viewed them as symbols of aristocratic excess. Others were destroyed during the collapse of noble households, caught between fleeing owners and armed Bolshevik patrols. Across the country, similar scenes played out. Borzois were shot, abandoned, or left to starve, not because they posed a threat, but because they were inseparable from the class the revolution sought to eliminate. Within a few years, Borzois were nearly extinct in all of Russia. So why didn't they vanish completely? The only reason Borzois survived at all is that some had already left. Before the revolution, Russian nobles had gifted Borzois to European royalty. A small number of them were exported to England, France, and the United States, where breeding populations formed far from the violence unfolding at home. When the old Russia collapsed, those dogs became the last genetic lifeboats for the breed. Modern Borzois descend from a surprisingly small number of survivors, a reminder of how close they came to disappearing entirely. What makes this story especially dark is the nature of the dogs themselves. Borzois are not aggressive. They're gentle, reserved, and often aloof with strangers. Indoors, they're low energy, almost delicate. Their temperament stands in sharp contrast to the violence that nearly erased them. They didn't disappear because they were dangerous. They disappeared because of who owned them. When a class was destroyed, its symbols went along with it. Today, Borzois survive. Rare, carefully bred, and far removed from the estates that created them. Most people know them not from history, but from the internet. Long-nosed jokes, Let me do it for you. Humor built around a body shape that once made them elite hunters. It's absurd and strangely fitting. A breed once tied to power, violence, and class struggle now lives on as a meme, stripped of context and softened by distance. But behind the joke of the long nose is a real story. These dogs are a reminder that animals don't exist outside of history. They are shaped by human systems, wealth, land, labor, and violence. When those systems collapse, the creatures bound in them can vanish too. The Borzoi didn't almost go extinct because it was weak. It almost disappeared because an entire world decided it needed to be erased. And the fact that it survived at all is an accident of timing, export papers, and a few people who carried the breed beyond the reach of revolution.